Well, guys, I made this video in hopes that I'll help you on how to write the perfect essay. There's just some stuff I picked up in college and high school, and let's see how it goes. So before you start writing, you need to take in mind who's gonna read it. Who is this intended for? The age, their beliefs. You don't wanna write too. Take in mind your language. Are they really complicated words, simple words for the age? The beliefs, make sure to watch the language, don't say anything that might offend someone. And then you gotta understand the topic. I'll recommend you make an outline, but that's not necessary. So, for introduction, I think this is the most important part. So, you need to have at least these 4 things in your introduction, which is number 1, you have to gain the attention. So, attention getter. Number 2, you need to introduce the subject. So, give some background information on what you're gonna talk about. Number 3, you gotta present your main idea, which is the thesis. And then you gotta expand on that. And number 4, you gotta transition. So let's take a look on how this will look. So this is for history. This is one of the questions I had to answer. So what social and economic factors influence your identity and opinions in America? So number 1, how I said, you need your attention getter right here. Everyone is equal. Not. The attention getter again is optional. You don't need to have an attention getter. That's why the stars are here, but I'll recommend it. Then you gotta give some background information. What are you gonna talk about? So for the question. So men and women do not relate at all in terms of money and power. I gave some background information on what I'm gonna talk about with the question. Now, number 3, you gotta present the thesis, which is the main idea. Now, in the other slide, you saw that I said direct and indirect. What I mean by that is, for example, my thesis right here, race, gender, and economic class are a major contributor in what creates the intersections of today in America. That right there is my thesis, my 3-point thesis, which is 3 things, race, gender, and economic class. I'll recommend for you to have 3 points because it'll make it easier when you're writing your body paragraphs. See, so right here, after that, that's body paragraph number 1, 2, and 3. So what I mean by direct and indirect is when your main idea or your thesis statement is direct, you restate the question. So you're going to be saying the social and economic factors that influence your identity and opinions in America are race, gender, and economic class. When it's indirect, you do not restate the question. You just say it here and however you want to say it, how I said it. Number 4, you got to expand on that. What do you mean by that? So I expanded right here. There is a big gap when it comes to a minority and disrespected person against a majority and acknowledged person. And then I transition, which is one way would be living in America as a minority race. So that is what my next paragraph is going to talk about. Okay, now let's go back here. When it goes to the body, you need to state your main point number 1. So what was my main point over here? Race. So I state my main point, which is race, with evidence. So with evidence, real and reasoning, which is your own. I would recommend for your essay to have half and half, what does that mean? That means that I recommend that your essay should have 50% evidence from other resources, which is like www.something, from a book, an article, and then the other 50% should be your own thoughts. Try to not incorporate opinions, but your own thoughts. So try to expand on what they're trying to say. Try to interpret it, what I'm trying to say. And then, would be like compare it, reference some people, and then use some personal information, like your own experience, stuff like that. Number 2, then have a transition. So then, and that will bring me to my next point. Another way that it affects America is by gender, and explain on that. And then each other paragraph will have these things, okay? So finally, we go to the conclusion. In your conclusion, you need to have these 4 things, which is summarize, restate, you gotta relate it, and you gotta provide some closure, which you gotta leave them with something. So right here you see number 1 and 2. You can do number 1 or 2, or you could do number 2 and number 1. You could first summarize and then restate, or you could restate your thesis and then you can summarize. And then we'll see how this plays out. So this is my conclusion for the essay I wrote. So you gotta summarize what you talked about, which I did in number 2, or you could have been number 1. So number 1 was summarize, right? How I said you could do number 1 or you could do number 2. So I decided to restate my thesis first. So the social and economic factors that influence one's identity and opinions are race, gender, and economic class. And then I decided to summarize. America has had some great changes since 1972, but sadly none of them have been revolutionary for equality. So I could have said this sentence first and then this sentence. Or like this, works either way. Then you gotta motivate the reader. You gotta choose something that's going on today that's relevant, and you gotta relate both of them. You gotta compare them. So for example, I said there may have been civil rights established and many other reforms, but it seems that they didn't do any good for the people. And then you gotta expand on that. What are you trying to say? So today people are still being killed, discriminated, and turned down just because of their race, gender, or social standing. And now you gotta provide some closure. Leave them with something to think about. I'll recommend that you start with a question. If someone doubts you, would you agree that people put limits on your abilities? So you gotta, for the conclusion, always try to end with a question. That's what I'll recommend. And then for your attention getter, in the beginning of your introduction, I would not recommend for you to start with a question. Maybe an exclamation like I did, or maybe just a sentence statement. Okay, and that'll probably be it. But if I could tell you something else, it would be unless otherwise stated, quality matters more than quantity. So if your teacher says, I don't care how long it is, as long as it answers the question and you provide some good evidence and reasoning, then don't put it hard on yourself. At least make it, at least each paragraph, 5 sentences each. That's why I have right here, 4. But when you think about it, it's 1, 2, 3, and then you expand 4, 5. Body, well, you can do 5 sentences right here. Main point, number 1. Evidence, number 2. Explain that evidence, number 3. And then your own thoughts, number 4. And then transition, number 5. 5 sentences. And you do that for each other one. And then conclusion, you gotta summarize. 1, restate. 2, motivate. And then right here, this is a 2-part. You gotta motivate and relate it. So that's 3, 4. And then provide closure, 5. And hopefully this was helpful. That's all I got for you for today. I'm out.